We're here to talk about our high-risk staffing project. And I think before we start the conversation, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and say what part you play in domestic violence court and in the risk project. So let's start with Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bennett. I am a probation officer in Tucson City Court, domestic violence.
Anna.
Hi, I'm Ana Harper Guerrero. I'm the executive vice president at a local domestic violence service provider. And my role in city court is to just, have a real broad kind of oversight on behalf of our organization and consult with the judge as needed and our staff and really think about process as it relates to survivor safety and accountability.
Thanks. Beth.
My name is Beth Brunner, and I'm with the City Public Defender's Office.
Okay, and Robin.
My name is Robin Akert. I'm the Criminal Justice Liaison for Cope Community Services. We provide behavioral health treatment, and my job is to help connect the defendants with any treatment services that can help benefit them while they're going through the court process.
Thanks. All right. So first, I would like Anna to talk about what your original intention was when you all first came up with the idea of these high-risk staffings.
Sure. The idea grew out of really just a desire to continue to think about our community's coordinated response and where there were gaps in that response as it relates to the understanding of risk across the system. I think that historically, advocates have their perception and information about risk. Judges have what they have. Law enforcement has what they have. And never did we have a discussion about all of those pieces to really have a thorough understanding of what are the potential risks and what should we do to respond in a way that is most supportive of change process, holding folks accountable, and certainly centering safety. So the process was constructed around gathering information from all of the parties that have a role in a particular case so that we all had the same set of information and could share perspective and talk about the best approaches to supporting both survivors and the folks that were in Judge Million's courtroom.
That's how we started with this project. And Rachel, did you think it was helpful the way we were doing these?
Yeah, absolutely. After we started the staffing, it provided an environment in which probation could hear the high-risk behaviors to look out for and to work together with you, Judge, about how to best supervise them moving forward as far as what classes would be best suited, what type of classes, how often they would be seen in front of the court, and also it gave opportunity to staff with Emerge and get some feedback about how we can best protect the victim moving forward in supervision.
So we hadn't included other people in these staffings. We just did them every week before our probation reviews. But then along came Stephen, and we wanted to use his example as an example of how we all came together, and we added more people to the staffings and how it really, I think, worked. So Stephen had been convicted of 2 counts of interference with judicial proceedings, domestic violence, which is like violation of protective order. He was accused of stalking the victim, texting her repeatedly. He had a very high risk appraise, which is the risk assessment that police do on the scene. He had a very high DVSI risk assessment that probation does when he gets assigned. And he actually was assigned to probation before we started these staffings. So what made you start to be concerned about him?
Yeah, so at that time, I received information from Emerge about some concerning behaviors that he was exhibiting. Also with me during our monthly visits, I noticed that his how he presented with me was changing rapidly. He came and spoke to me about a situation in which he lost the ability to see his son because of an order of protection that was filed by the third party that was supervising those visits and making those visits happen with his son. From that point, he started to escalate in his behavior. Mental health became a huge concern for me at that point, and I had knowledge that he was engaged with COPE, but not the extent of what resources he was receiving there. During that meeting that he had with me when all these behaviors were being addressed, his level of aggressiveness almost caused him to be taken into custody at that point. But we were able to recognize the bigger picture there, and that he needed to be connected to resources, and that needed to be more closely supervised by probation as to what resources he was receiving. I directed him to go meet with COPE the next day. And from that point, I was more closely in communication with COPE.
Anna, what concerning things did Emerge see that you were able to share basically with Rachel? Because I know there's a confidentiality issue.
Sure. Well, what happened is that we started to receive emails from Stephen on our general delivery box for the organization. And they were, kind of like vague and appeared to be incoherent, the way that they were written. It was difficult to understand exactly what Stephen was trying to say, although there was a definite undertone. And what I extracted was that he definitely felt like it was somehow as a result of the victim's participation with us that he would no longer have access to his son.
And Rachel shared these with me, and I was concerned, and I was like up at night thinking, what this guy sounds like he might be kind of a ticking time bomb. And luckily I ran into Beth in the hallway at court one day. So Beth.
Assigned to domestic violence court, and Stephen was my client up until taking the plea. After that, I kind of had moved away from domestic violence court. I am assigned to mental health court and Compass court, which are treatment courts. We focus on, in those courts, behavior modification in people with mental health diagnosis. We manage that with medication and treatment and the person's individual needs in mind. We work very closely with the behavioral health providers. And I've been able to receive a lot of extra training through those courts, how to deal with people and how to do out of the box and creative problem solving.
And I think it was great to have Beth there because I felt like he would trust Beth. And so it was someone who we could have him engage with that he would trust. Robin, what did you learn from that first staffing, and what did you think of what we should be working on?
So in gathering the details about his case, I had heard about his behavioral health concerns, like the things that he was sending to the to Emerge and the things that he was saying. And then I had also learned that he was homeless, living in shelters or living out of his car. So this seemed to be an added stressor that seemed to exacerbate his mental health and increasing his symptoms and decreasing his stability. So what we had him do is we had him meet with the case manager and complete a SPDAT. And then I think he also met with the housing navigator. So that was a process that got started to help him get connected with resources for housing placement options. And then we discussed his mental illness treatment further to discuss with him all the treatment options that were afforded to him. Had him meet with the case manager regularly. And then we found that he was interested in individual therapy. He was also agreeable to meeting with the provider to discuss potential med adjustments.
Tell us about why you suggested that we bring in the MIST officer from Tucson Police Department.
So Jason is the sergeant of the mental health support team. And what they do is they do preventive maintenance kind of thing to prevent incidents through early intervention and then follow up. Jason and I, he's also in Compass Court, had just been to a training where we did this exact type of thing. We discussed a high-risk individual and what do we do to prevent anything coming forward, and how do we give him the support that he needs.
That I know the victim was always involved with Emerge, and she would come to my review hearings under an assumed name so she could watch what was going on. What was her reaction to how we were handling this?
Yeah, I think that that was a difficult aspect to this because it was difficult for her to understand some of the reasons why things were being handled in the way that they were, and specifically all of the effort to get him engaged in the proper kinds of services to stabilize his mental health. I think that, from her perspective, it was solely about justice in the sense of, if he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, then he should be in jail. And any attempts to do anything other than that for her felt like just sort of giving him, a pass or not addressing what she perceived to be his resistance or refusal to do the things that he was ordered to do. And granted, in hindsight, I think that there was more we could have done to provide her with context about that. And I think the advocates did what they could and shared what they could with her. But I think that, from the perspective of all that she had experienced during the relationship she had with him, all of the trauma she experienced, and then the resulting difficulties in her own life, figuring out housing instability, I think for her, this idea of fairness had a different meaning, and her idea of, accountability and justice were different because it was really rooted in her own suffering and all of the disruption of her own stability that happened as a result of his actions and his instability.
And I knew that I knew that one of the advocates had told me that she thought we were babying him. But to me, I was much more concerned about his mental health, because to me, that's a long-term safety thing. And we had that discussion, Rachel and I. If I put him in custody, then he gets out at the end of his probation term, and then we have no control over him at all. So it was a decision, I think, that we all made, that it was better to keep him on probation where we could keep track of him. Rachel, at one point, though, we did revoke him on probation, right?
Yes, we did, Judge. At a certain point where we had laid down very strict guidelines of who he was and was not allowed to communicate with. And he did break that condition of his probation. And there was a warning that if he broke that condition again, he would be taken into custody. So
Judge took him into custody on a Thursday at a probation review, and then put his next court date the next Wednesday, which would have meant 6 days later. Through my training in the other courts, I've learned that two days is really enough to get a person's attention. Best practices say you getting on 6 days, you're doing more harm than good. And so the other thing was, he had driven to court, and as Robin had indicated earlier, that was his shelter. That's where he lived. It was his only asset, and it was his only transportation to do the day labor that he was doing. So there was a very good chance that his car would have been towed by the time he got out, and he had no other income. He wouldn't have been able to get that tow or that car out of impound. He wouldn't have had the ability to do it. So by taking him into custody and having that risk, we were taking everything away from him. So I convinced the judge that, hey, what you did, you got his attention. That's what your intention was. I was pushing on probation. I said, hey, let's do something about this. Let's get him out, put him on GPS, do whatever you want. I got resources for where he could plug in his GPS, even though he was homeless. There were shelters that he could go and plug it in. He could go to the library. I had one colleague say that their client plugged in at the Circle K because they have an outlet outside. I was able to visit him a couple of times within that less than 24 hours to let him know what the team was doing and the extra effort that we were putting into him. And through those visitations, I think I got him to trust us a little bit more. He saw the effort that we put into him. He saw the results. The jail was taken away, everything from him, made him resentful and wary of us. But the fact that he did get out within that 24 hours and got on GPS and saw all the effort, I think that helped him to trust not just me more, but also to trust Rachel more, because it was probation that went and picked him up and put him on the GPS, and trust the judge more that she was willing to take that risk.
After that, did you start to see a difference?
A huge difference and a huge turnaround with the med adjustments. And once he started therapy, within the first few weeks of the med adjustments and his first therapy sessions, our talking to him was a very different conversation. He seemed more open and trusting with us, and there was a lot less paranoia. His conversations were future and goal oriented. With positive motivation. You could really see an affect change in his outward appearance. He was willing to share more too of what he had learned through the process, and showed appreciation for having gone on this path of education and self-reflection.
Was speaking more coherently with me. I could see that trust was being rebuilt with him. He was no longer apprehensive about trusting, you, Judge, and moving forward on his probation. For a while, he was thinking our main goal was just to arrest him, and he had sent a few text messages to me regarding that he didn't trust specifically any women, because that was primarily who was involved with his case.
What did the victim think, Anna, when he was released from jail and as we kept with him?
Yeah, I think she was really upset about it. For the reasons that I, gave earlier. And if I may, I want to just say a couple of things. I think I was too. I was upset too. Initially, and I had two concerns. One was that I didn't know where this was headed for him. And he was clearly, targeting the agency, knew some of our sites, and with all that has gone on around us as of late in terms of, gun violence, shootings, etc. Of course, my mind went to worst case scenario. And I felt a sense of responsibility about that. But beyond that, I think in some ways I did feel a little bit similar to the victim in like he shouldn't be allowed out. And really, I really have appreciated this case because it really made me pause and really reflect about the true intention that I gave about the high risk staffing, and what we're really trying to do here is build safety and create change for folks. And in order to do that, you have to check your ego sometimes. You have to keep a hold of yourself and not have emotional reactions to things, and really try to think logically and rationally with the information we have. And so in that way, ultimately, I did come around to understand that, yes, if he was held in jail and not provided his medications and pushed off the edge because he came out with less than what he went in with, that was not going to be safe in the long term for the victim, his child, and or potentially our staff. In hindsight and reflection, even though we had this high risk staffing process, I didn't utilize it in the way that I could have. Initially, I went straight to probation and said, here's what he's doing. He should be in trouble for this, kind of thing. And so again, I've really reflected about it. And I think the victim, it was difficult for her because she saw it in within the context of her perspective that she was struggling mightily to live and survive, and here he is doing all of these things and not being held accountable for it. And I, we did our best to share with her the bigger picture around that, how this would create safety for her and her child. The more stable and safer he is, the more access to stability and safety she has. And that's where we tried to stay with her, and certainly validating and listening to her concerns. But I do ultimately think it was the right thing to do. And I'm glad that it turned out in the way that it did.
The things that really struck me about the staffing is that the DV treatment person came to the staffing and had no clue. that any of this was going on. She thought he was doing well. And so to me, that was a hole in the system that we have to address. One more thing, I want to say that the last time, well, once we saw him, he was done with his classes, and we kept him on probation for a while on review hearings. And I offered to convert him to probation, to unsupervised probation. But I also said, do you want to stay with Rachel a little longer? And Rachel, were you surprised at what he said?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never had anyone request to stay on probation longer.
It was his choice, which I thought was really cool, that he was like, no, Judge, I think I want to stay. I want that structure a little longer. How is he doing now that we don't see him?
He's doing great. He's saving up money to buy a trailer. He finished his schooling. He has a job. And I recently saw him, and I said that you were asking about him, Judge Millian, and he lit up. He was so excited that you remembered him. He said that he ultimately had a positive experience through DV court, and he could tell that everybody on the team cared about the outcome.
Is the victim doing okay, Anna?
I think so. It's a long-term process, I think, to repair and rebuild. And so, my hope for both of them is that they will continue to do that and continue to be safe.